PlayStation 1 was the last console that I rented games for. I vaguely remember renting games for the N64, but that was usually along with my friends, or my one friend who had an N64 at the time. My town had 2 video rental stores, one had a huge selection, and the other one was Blockbuster. So let's talk a little bit about the games that I rented for the PlayStation. Occasionally, you would fall for the advertisements in a magazine when you rented games. That was the case with Future Cop LAPD and one other game on this list. I don't remember what magazine it was, but I remember seeing this a few times. This is a top-down action game, well, kind of with like a swinging camera and whatnot, where you ride around in a mech in futuristic LA and you just blast things with a machine gun, your missiles, and bombs. It's fine. There isn't anything really wrong with this game. It isn't terrible, it isn't great. It's just one of those games that I remember renting just because of the advertisements. I've talked about Theme Hospital before, but this was a game that I stumbled across when I was looking for something to rent on the weekend. I believe my friend Drew was explaining the game to me, and I thought it was really cool and everything. Rented it, spent the night with him, hanging out, just trying to figure out this game, and then spent the next day trying to do a little bit more in it. I do remember renting it a few times. I never knew there was a PC version, which is kind of fun. In this game, you run a high-tech hospital, and you cure a bunch of cartoonish ailments. It's a really fun game. Even if it doesn't look super great on the PlayStation, it's still a lot of fun. This isn't just one of the games that I rented. Kagero Deception 2 is one of the best games on the PS1. It's one of my favorite games as well. It was my entry point into the Deception series, and it was awesome. It started me just going out and trying to collect all the different Deception games that were out there, even though I didn't know how many there were at the time. In Kagero, you play as Melina, who is captured and raised by the Time Nodes. Don't worry, they're not important to the series whatsoever. They get killed off at the end of this game. Your entire goal is to defend the different buildings that you get put in for like 5 or 6 missions at a time. And the only way that you can fight back is by setting traps and luring your enemies into those traps. It's so much fun. There are environmental hazards as well. It's just such a great game. Rampage on the NES is one of my favorite games. And when I started renting games again for like the PS1, because I took a break there with renting games for myself, I stumbled across Rampage Through Time. And I was kind of surprised the series was still going, and I was really excited to try it. I really love the fact that there are a whole bunch of more monsters in this, because that's exactly what Rampage needed. More crazy monsters to run around and blow up buildings. It's a formula that works great. I was also a huge fan of Godzilla movies at the time, so getting to run around as something that kind of looked like Godzilla was just a ton of fun. WWF Attitude is one of those earlier wrestling games that moved into 3D that I remember renting, and I remember enjoying it, but I don't remember it being as hard as it was when I went back to revisit it. I oftentimes get this game confused with WWF Raw for some reason, even though they're very different games. I kind of remember a friend of mine renting the N64 version, but I could just be confusing that with one of the WCW games. There were a lot of wrestling games released around this time, and I do not remember all of them. This one, like I said, it felt a little bit harder than Smackdown, but yeah, it was alright. I do like Smackdown a lot more than this one. WWF Smackdown is the game that introduced me to rage quitting. Not just rage quitting, where you just get mad, throw the controller, and quit the game, but a friend of mine got so upset that I was beating him at a game that he owned at the time that he actually, like that, it had to have been right after that Saturday. My friend Drew took the game to some used game store and immediately sold it after losing to me over and over again. He never lost to me in either fighting games or wrestling games, and for some weird reason, he could not beat me when I was playing as Chris Jericho in WWF Smackdown. And he got so mad that he sold the game. Oh, man. Anyway, this game was a ton of fun. This was kind of the peak of my fandom of WWF at the time. But yeah, I love SmackDown. It's not as good as the second one, but I never rented that one. Wild 9 is the other game on this list that I kind of fell for all the ads when I bought this one. Seeing all those different ads, it kind of created a desire in order to want to go and play the game. All you really had were a bunch of screenshots and a very brief description of these like full-page ads of something called Wild 9. I didn't really know what it was. It looked like a regular old PS1 game when I saw it. I eventually rented it, and it was fine. It wasn't special. It wasn't, terrible. It was just a 2.5D action game. Yeah, the big thing here was finding unique and creative ways to killing your enemies. That's pretty much it. Jade Cocoon is a short but spectacular RPG, and in many ways it feels like a Pokemon clone. It plays a little bit like Pokemon, and you go around collecting monsters, and you have those monsters fight on your behalf. However, you can have your character also fight the battles, which I've always kind of wanted to do in Pokemon, but they don't really let you do that. They'll send a 10-year-old off on a quest to go save the world, but heaven forbid he punches a Clefairy in the face. The big difference between Jade Cocoon and Pokemon, at least in the early Pokemon games, is Jade Cocoon had you combining your monsters in order to improve their skills and, make their attacks stronger and improve their resistance to different things. It sort of works. The system can be abused a little bit, but yeah, it creates a very interesting scenario. Instead of just having like three, like a regular weapons triangle or a rock, paper, scissors thing, you have 4 elements that you can basically combine: air, earth, water, and fire. And yeah, it's pretty easy. Stuff is always explained to you in this. The game kind of feels a little bit like Princess Mononoke and Pokemon were combined into one, because there's a heavy there's a lot of focus on nature and that sort of thing, and returning balance to nature in this small village in the jungle. The story in the game isn't told as well in the first game as it is in the second one, and yeah, like I said, the game is pretty short. But I was a huge fan of anime, and I was a big fan of Pokemon back in the late 90s. And stumbling across this while I was at a family video, I think, it was really one of those great experiences to find something that it felt like nobody else had discovered before, and playing it, and this game is just so much fun. Resident Evil was a series that I kind of came to late. This game, Resident Evil 2, was my entry point into the series. I remember seeing advertisements for it. I would always see like Resident Evil Director's Cut, always on sale at the store. Never had any desire to play it. And then a friend of mine, again, my friend Drew, I rented an awful lot of games with Drew back in the day. He'd started telling me about Resident Evil 2 when we were at the video store looking for something to rent for the weekend. And he started telling me about Resident Evil 2, so I was like, great, let's get that. And for some reason, he was always the one when we had a single player game. He was always the one that played it, and I would usually watch. Unless it was an RPG, then I played it, and he yelled at me and told me the stuff I was doing wrong, which oftentimes he was the one. But whatever, we're talking about Resident Evil 2. So we rented this game, took it back to his house, and we just started playing it. I think we started at like 7 or 8 o'clock or something like that. And we didn't end up finishing it until around like 4 a.m. And at that point, like we had the volume on the TV cranked down really low so that we wouldn't wake anybody else up, even though they probably knew what we were doing anyway. And we just kind of huddled around his TV playing this game, freaking out about everything that was going on in it, trying not to yell when the jump scares came. It was very different from every other game out there. I had never really played a scary game like this before, even though now it's kind of tame, but it was really kind of amazing to go through this and just to play through it on Leon, have that much fun doing it, like playing through the game, not finishing it until like basically the next morning. It was such a fun game to play. I really love Resident Evil 2 just for that one experience. It was awesome. I don't care what anyone says, Kartia is a wonderful game. This is one of the games that I actually rented from Blockbuster. So we talked about Jade Cocoon, where I rented from a family video. Kartia was a game that I rented from a Blockbuster. And yeah, I knew nothing about it. I just saw the Atlas logo and I was like, awesome. I like Ogre Battle and Tactics Ogre. Let's give Kartia a try. So I rented it, took it home, didn't have the instruction manual for it because heaven forbid anyone just makes a copy of the instruction manual just in case. And after playing it for like 2 or 3 days, I was getting really into the story and the game's mechanics and everything. And I had to take it back, and I really didn't want to. I did end up returning it, but I kept it on my memory card, that save file on my memory card. And I was just looking, and it started me, and it basically caused me to try to find this game in order to buy it, because I was so interested in seeing what happened. Every time I went back to that Blockbuster, it was always rented out for some weird reason. Something was going on with it. But yeah, it was one of the games that kind of introduced me to tactical RPGs. I had played Tactics Ogre before, and I had played Ogre Battle, but I really hadn't gotten into the genre too much. And Ogre Battle really isn't the same. But I liked Tactics Ogre, but didn't like how hard it was for the PS1. And getting this game, it felt a lot easier. And it was just a lot more fun to kind of sit there and play. And it's got a really interesting, the same like weapons triangle thing, but they're all monsters. It's a really cool game. It's a little short, but it is just a ton of fun. So those are some of the games that I remember renting from either Family Video or Blockbuster. That was pretty much where I rented PlayStation games. The days of me going to the wonderful general store and renting NES games, those were kind of over by the late 90s and stuff like that. This is a time that I kind of miss in some ways. You could probably still do it with like the PS2 and Xbox and that sort of thing, just because you didn't necessarily need like those day one patches or anything like that to play a game. Now I don't know if renting games still even exists anymore, what with video stores kind of going away, and I don't know if there's still like I don't know if Netflix still does it, or if they or if they were the ones that did it, but somebody would let you rent games similar to like Netflix. I don't know if that's still around, and I don't even know if that is even like I don't even know if that can even be done now, because so many games are not on the disc anymore, and you need to download like 50 gig patches to get them to work and whatnot. Anyway, these are some of my memories, or some of the games that I find memorable from when I was renting video games. Just the ones that stuck out in my mind. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let me know some of the games that you rented back in the day. I'll talk to you all later. Bye.